Our call-in number is 563-999-3581, and press 1, and that puts you in queue to talk to us, and we would love to hear your comments and questions because that makes this your show. We'll give Michael a moment to get dialed in. We did have a question come in to us through the app, so not pertaining to the app itself, but just a general question. So when Michael gets on, and I think
Michael
he just got
on, sweetie.
We'll address that after you give your intro.
Cool. Well, welcome everybody. Delighted that you're here. And this new year just opens a whole new, fresh start of possibilities and some old dynamics to still be dealt with upon the globe. And here we are doing what we can do to stay connected to the active presence of love and do exactly that. My mind has been kind of dancing with excitement since an experience Jeannie and I had yesterday with Arya Rain. You know, we've shared with you at 4 how she came up just several months ago with the thought as she was watching an anatomy and physiology video, and there was a place in the video where the organs of the body are singing to you, and when the eyes tell you their part, they sing, "I am your eyes, I am your eyes, I see the world around you." And Arya Rain looks at me as we're watching this and says, "Papa, they don't understand. We don't see with our eyes, we see with our brain." So yesterday we were taking her home, and she had done a piece of art, about 11 by 17 piece of paper she'd done at school, and she had some puff paints, and she'd drawn some figures, and it was just fun. And so she held it up to show it to me. I explained what I saw, and it wasn't what she saw at all, like not even close. I said, "Well, that's interesting, Arya. You look at that, and your mind has a different reality than mine. Isn't that interesting?" So I explained my reality in detail, and then she explained hers. And it's like, well, so your mind is making a different reality out of this piece of paper and what's on it than my mind is. And then I turned the page upside down. So now, when I look at this, I have a whole different reality. And she's like, "So do I." So we explained our realities, you know, what the picture looked like to us, what our brains were generating. And we ended up in this game where I would turn it this way, I would turn the page that way. What realities have we got now? And you know, in the fray of it all, in the play of it all, she's like, "Well, you know, I ended up rolling it into a tube and looking inside and looking at the puff paint from the inside, and then looking at it with light coming in, you know, from the distance, and looking at it pointed at Jeannie so she could see Jeannie's hair and Jeannie's." So it just was like we just had this blast of coming up with all the realities. She said, "Well, I want to look for more realities. What realities are there?" And so we turned the page back, you know, back to front. It was just so much fun, and this little one is just so clear that everybody has a different output of their mind at any given point, and it's their own reality. And what prompted me to bring it up is just as I think about, for me, it's exciting. It's really pretty cool to think about with this foundation. Where is this little one going to go with what we've developed, with what we're understanding? And we're still probably in very primitive stages in understanding the whole of how perception works, what the world, you know, when you think about the fact that, you know, that Harvard research we talked about tells us it's in a time frame where 10,000 brain cells are firing. The structure of the mind, the construct of the mind, the reality is made up of 9 bits of data. And, you know, we've spoken before about how in that same time frame, which is the 25th of a second, it's been estimated there are perhaps 20 trillion bits of data available in the actuality. And I think we are designed, I think our instrument, called this body-mind unit, this human device, if we get to incarnating fully as we're designed to, as active love, and eradicate the corrupt data of hostility and fear, that we're designed to be able to comprehend and recreate this whole creation in who knows how many different ways. And so when I think about how I was raised, and it didn't occur to me, actually, let's see, it was probably, I'd been doing this work for several years, and I went to a conference in, let's see, it was in Colorado, Denver, called Global Sciences. And I was keynoting, pardon me, keynoting at that conference, and another gentleman named Bob Beck was also keynoting. Bob Beck is a scientist, inventor, and I'm in the audience at this point, and Bob is presenting. And I went up to Bob afterward. Pardon me, I have a frog in my throat. He brought up this idea of reality versus actuality, which I had never thought of or never heard of before. And it was like, oh man, that's it. That's the thing we can hang this understanding on. So after his presentation, I went up to Bob, and I happened to have a $50 bill in my pocket, and I handled it. I had never met him before, but I handed it to him. I introduced myself, said, "Thank you for your presentation." He's like, well, what is this? So you just gave me an idea that just changed the whole body of work that I'm working on in the way of understanding. And he's like, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, you introduced this idea of reality versus actuality in a different context than we're using it, but it was what opened my mind to this. Oh, there it is. We have a construct called reality, and then there's the actuality. And Bob at this point was probably in his early 60s, and he actually started to cry. It's like, what's happening? So nobody has ever acknowledged me for the work that I've done like this, and just a stranger walking up to me and handing me a $50 bill to say thank you was just so far out of his perspective on life that it just really hit a big emotional piece of him. So that was the beginning of a very good friendship until he passed. Actually, we made a couple of trips to Hawaii together, taught, and it was a pretty sweet friendship until he passed away. Bless his heart. But it was Bob Beck, if you've ever heard of his work, that you've heard of perhaps a pulsing device that's used to eradicate parasites and that sort of thing. Well, that was Bob's invention, or one of Bob's inventions. In any event, I am excited to think about where, with the foundation that a child who's been circling the sun for just 4 years, knows she's eternal, and is already talking about playing a game with me. I've been thinking about, gee, we could create a game, that we could market out of this, about finding realities. But just that at 4, she's playing a game of what's my reality, what's your reality, and how many realities can we find? Where she will, in her lifetime, take this work, where she'll take this thinking, how it's going to impact what reality she can create and what actuality she's going to get to bring about in her world. It's interesting that in the Aramaic language, the word manifest does not mean, go and get your nice new Cadillac, manifest your nice new Cadillac. The word manifest in Aramaic means obvious. What is obvious to you is what ends up expressing energetically in your world, in your mind, in your perception, and in your physiology. So when I think about what Arya will manifest as she grows and develops her understanding and interacts, develops friends, relationships, life, she's learning about, we're actually getting ready to do a pollinator garden, so she's learning about that. It's just, what will she do? When I think about the what should I say, I guess the dull gray, I had some wonderful experiences as a kid. I had some pretty challenging ones too. But compared to what I watched her developing and understanding, it was pretty dull gray, and hers is like flashing, brilliant rainbows going off. It'll be just interesting to see what this young lady produces in her world as she grows and expands. I went to pick her up the other day, and her teacher could not say enough. I guess that was the day. I didn't know it at the time, but her next door neighbors have a little boy who's 3 and started in the same school as her just last week. And that particular day, Arya had gone and escorted him into his classroom, and then as the day unfolded, went to her teacher and said, "I'd like to go and check on Dom and make sure that he's okay." And the teacher allowed her, pre-kindergarten, to go to the little one's classroom and check on him. And when I picked her up, it was the first time I'd met her. She couldn't say enough about how generous and how loving Arya was. So it's exciting to think about what this generation is going to do, what these children that we're now really truly educating, which in the roots of the word mean to draw out, not to put in. Much of our so-called educational system is about indoctrination. We have information for you. Let me fill your mind with what we know. And of course, from time to time, there's been an assessment of knowledge done, and I forget what the last time I read about this a few years ago, but some scientists came out with the thought that, about 75% of what we had all learned as children at that time, as children now as adults, 75% it was obsolete. We knew it wasn't true. So it's pretty cool to think about what she's going to produce. And Jeannie was sitting in the front seat of the car driving as we were doing that. What did that resonate for you, Jeannie?
Well, just hearing her use the words "my reality" was amazing. I mean, just that she was actually grasping it, that this was my reality, this is your reality, and that it's not the actuality. She didn't use the word actuality, but I think she got it, that you were both seeing something different. And she would actually, she said, "my brain sees it as," is how she would word it a couple of times. And I thought that was just really cute. And it was a game that took place, it takes us like 10, 15 minutes to get from here to her house, and that game went the whole time.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Let's find another reality, Papa. What other realities can we find? Anyway, so the gifts of life. So, Machine, you have a question for us?
Yes,
that somebody had written in through the app?
Yes, they wrote it in through the app. However, it doesn't have to do with the app, but that's just how they chose to contact us. And it says, "Am I wrong to think about smoking cannabis is not good?"
Okay. Well, that opens a big question in today's world. It's interesting. One of the biggest pushers of pot, of THC on the planet, and standing to fill his pockets beyond our wildest expectations, is a former Speaker of the House of the United States Senate, of the United States Congress. And the drug pushing that's going on in our culture is just amazing. We live in a town here now in Bristol, Virginia, that very conservative. Jeannie actually remembers when they first moved here that on Sundays everything was closed. They had blue laws and nothing was open, restaurants, nothing, except the churches were open. And now they've built a new casino, and they've got, in the building that the casino occupied was a newly licensed pot growing facility, that would supply pot to the residents of the city of Bristol, Virginia. Tennessee residents couldn't buy it, but Virginia residents could. One of the things that amazes me when I think about it is, why would people want to have a brain altered by chemistry as a normal way of life? Of course, we all watched, or many of us, pardon me, I shouldn't say we all, many of us watched fathers and mothers who, maybe came home from work, if we had working mothers, who would sit down and say, I need a drink to unwind, and basically take this mind-altering chemical mix. And if you take water you take alcohol and you take the water out, you've got ether. So why someone would take a concentrated form of ether in order to relax? Well, that makes sense. But what are we trying to escape in order to have a brain that functions differently than the norm? And I think that's a big question to ask oneself when they consider either using alcohol or pot. THC, the active chemical in pot, is, as I understand it, I'm no expert on it, has a molecule that's shaped very similarly to, or fits very well into the openings in the cell through which nutrition enters and through which wastes are removed. And in that, I see one of the most destructive aspects of pot, and that is that the body has to, once those openings get plugged up, which alters the function of the cell, and we're not just talking about the brain now. The brain, of course, is the one organ that's impacted most immediately. Actually, I understand that one of the most common elective surgeries in the United States now is breast reduction surgery for young men. And pot so alters the THC molecule, and its interference with cell metabolism so alters the endocrine system of young men that they start to produce female hormones and grow breasts. So that, certainly leaves it all in the place of a big question. With something like alcohol, the body metabolizes the alcohol out within about 24 hours or so. So any impact from alcohol in terms of the mental type impact, the fact that it inhibits inhibitors in the brain. Basically, the reason why people will do insane things on alcohol, things they wouldn't normally do, is because a great deal of the functioning of the human brain is an inhibitory function. When we were 3 and we stepped up to do something and somebody beat us into submission saying no, that put an inhibitor into the brain for, I'm not doing that one again. So that inhibitory function, the first thing to go with alcohol is the inhibitors, and in a similar way with pot, the inhibitors go. And so all of a sudden, saying and doing things that 10 minutes earlier were not acceptable because those behaviors were inhibited, all of a sudden become acceptable and express. Like, I think something like 42%, the latest numbers I've seen of date rapes happen under the influence of alcohol. Worldwide, 3.3 million people a year die from alcohol use. Yet it's a special fluid that people keep in a cabinet, special just for their friends and their relatives when they want to celebrate. And yet people die from alcohol poisoning, and the number of motor accidents, the number of abuses, the number of criminal actions. It's just, I don't have the statistics memorized, but it's outrageous. Now, pot, the challenge that I see with it, if it were metabolizing out in 24 hours like alcohol, well, it would probably be more in the category to alcohol. I think it's a definite step worse. Although, there's I forget who it was that said it. If you take 2 guys and put them in a room with alcohol, you're going to have a fight. If you take 2 guys and put them in a room with pot, you're going to have a band. So it tends not to move toward the violent side of nature, but it does tend to move toward the destruction of physiology. And one of the reasons is because, and I don't know whose numbers are accurate here. It's not something I've paid much attention to in a few years, but there's research that THC molecule, when it gets into a cell and inhibits nutritional uptake and waste removal, has a half-life of somewhere between, some research, as I understand it, indicates 8 days. Others say it may be as much as 8 months. So once that cell inlet outlet is blocked, it's blocked for somewhere between 8 days and 8 months. I think that can lead to some pretty tragic effects, and medicine has been doing lots of research in that regard, and I haven't been keeping up with it all, but my input would be, I would suggest that if someone is uptight, feels like they need a drink, or wants to mellow out with a joint, that a whole lot more constructive way of handling the stresses that one's trying to avoid through the use of those substances is to sit down to a worksheet, confront the stress that's going on in the mind, and process through it. Learn to remove and let go of that stressor rather than just create an anesthetic effect. So that would be, my perspective on that. Carl Jung, I just came across again a quote from him where he says, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." So Jung's saying, don't float off in space and fantasize about things being wonderful. Do the work of finding your own darkness, that which is inhibited in you, that's based in hostility or fear, and bring it forward to awareness. Anesthetics such as alcohol, pot, a whole variety of drugs function to shut down and inhibit the awareness of what's in the mind rather than opening and cleaning up what's in the mind. So my inclination would be to suggest someone, if they're stressed and feel like they need a way to chill, is pick up a worksheet, breathe, do the work of forgiveness, and move into the space where if there's something under the surface, somebody comes home from work and they're all stressed out, oh, I don't know what's going on, stop, do a worksheet and find out what's going on. There's a reason, there's something in there that's going on. Bring that to awareness, as Carl Jung says, and he's probably one of the 3 top psychiatrists of all time. Bring your own darkness to the light rather than anesthetize it. Anesthetics and those things that alter brain chemistry in the way of inhibition are in no way, shape, or form beneficial to humanity. That would be my take. So there are my thoughts on that. Do you have any thoughts to add to it, Jeannie?
No, that pretty much covered it, and I will write her back and let her know that you addressed it on today's show. So, hopefully,
cool. We've got a video. I'm going to see if we can dig it out. It was one we used to use in Laws of Living, and I had actually gotten permission from the man who originally did the video. It was on pot. He was a psychologist in the school system and started to notice that kids who were doing really well in school, brilliant kids, kids who were successful, and all of a sudden their grades started dropping. They started getting in trouble in school. He started to look at what was going on, investigate, and pot was the thing that was taking these kids out of the success mode that we're in and put them into trouble. So we did a video on myths of marijuana, it's called. And we have that on one of our hard drives. I'll have to find that. We'll have to get it into our catalog.
Yeah, we were given permission to use that. So.
Yep. Yeah. We never did officially put it into our video catalog or get it edited to do that. So I'll have to dig that out and we'll have to do that. It's really powerful, the research that he did on it. And that's where the information about the half-life of the THC molecule comes from and why it can be so destructive. So thank you for that question.
And we have a hand up.
Awesome. Let's say hello to our caller.
I believe it is Miss Susan, 610. You're on the air. Hi, guys.
Welcome, young lady.
Thank you. I'm calling prematurely because I have a situation that's so fresh and new I haven't done a worksheet on it. But I wanted to call you since it's the hour of your radio show.
Right.
We are in a situation with our housemate. His car broke down. It needs about $850 worth of work.
Ouch.
And I did text you a few days ago about that van, which is a long shot anyway for him to drive this van that he has, this SUV that he has, that he can't sleep in comfortably. He wants a van, and I've told you the situation. In any case, I'll approach this from a different angle. I read something once that you should not ever do more for someone, that they're willing, more work for someone than they're willing to do for themselves.
Yes.
And we have this situation where I've been practicing the gentle art of blessing, and it's helped me tremendously, but it's also helped me get into a situation where I think we have somebody living here who is pretty much thinking he can probably live here forever without doing anything to get himself going. I think he thinks he's incapable, or he thinks the world owes him. And this morning I was having a discussion with him. He borrowed my car to get something out of his car. He had to drive to the car place. And he brought some stuff home. And I said, you know, Michael Ryce's book title is Why Is This Happening to Me Again? Because what's happening with Michael has happened over and over and over. And he has said, people aren't very nice. I don't like people. I like animals. And Michael, you told that story the other day, which stuck in my head, of a man coming to town and was asked, how did you like your town? I loved it, and the people were great. Well, you'll have the same experience here. And then you told the vice versa, the opposite.
Right.
And this is the case of the opposite, I think, where the expectation is things aren't going to work out. Everybody ends up throwing me out. Nobody's going to really do for me what I need, and so forth and so on. And I'm up at the molding with frustration. And this is a surprise because I've been in such good shape.
Oh my God, you're getting an opportunity to learn to heal and forgive frustration? Well, how wonderful is that?
Yeah, I know. So anyway, here I'm calling in. I'm just calling in, and okay, I'm starting to breathe. Okay, it's okay if I can't solve this, right? It's okay that I don't have to do anything. Is that true? I mean,
not your responsibility.
I'm very confused. Yeah.
Well, you know, when you talk about that idea of don't do something for someone else that they're not willing to do for themselves, I think there's a distinction there. This is something that, for instance, I apply with Arya. I think that parents, grandparents, seeing as how that's the position we're in, are here not to do for the child what they can do for themselves, to never do for them what they can do for themselves. And instead of it being a place to lean, the adult in the child's life is there to make leaning unnecessary. And I think that's kind of the point you're getting at with Michael being there. And there is, I think, a distinction between what one is capable of doing for oneself and what one is willing to do, and what one's capable of doing.
Yeah.
And my take is, it sounds like so far you found a way to do a somewhat reasonable exchange with Michael. and that he's doing things that support you, and so there is kind of an exchange going. I know that just a couple of weeks ago, it got really cold here, and I had met a homeless man out behind our post office back a few weeks ago, and just, went over to him and introduced myself and handed him a few bucks to say, it looks like you're having a tough time and holding the space. And over time, when I go to the post office, I'd, drive around back and he'd be there. He was actually living there. And that week where it got down, it was down to -4. We actually paid for a motel for him to go to because I think it would freeze to death. And had to struggle to do so with him. His resistance to being supported and cared for, and had some hostility come up, and he contacted me.
Right.
He left the motel, finished. He had the week, and fortunately it warmed up. And he contacted me a few days ago and asked if I would take him to another town nearby where he had a possibility for a place to stay, which I did. And the upshot of that is that I had told him, that I had other plans. It was just out of the blue that he contacted me. He said, well, I've got a pretty busy day, but I will make space to come pick you up, but we're going to have to move it and book it and get up there, and then I need to get back. And when I went to pick him up, it just became sort of, well, it's my job to do it for him rather than he's going to participate. At which point I said, well, if we're going to do this, we need to do it now. And then when we arrived, instead of helping to unpack so that I could get going, he decided he was going to do something else. And I finally said, well, I need to go. So if you're going to unpack your things, let's do it. And so as a result of that, something was left in the car that he didn't unpack or didn't take out of the car. And he's been texting me to, well, I need to get it to him. It's like, oh, excuse me. Not my responsibility. You had a responsibility to, with integrity, take things and handle them when we got there, and you didn't bother. So, no, I'm not going to run that 20-mile trip again and to bring this item to you that you say you need so desperately. You're going to have to make your way here, So I think there's a difference between what somebody's capable of and what someone is willing to do. And, you've shared that Michael has been willing to do a share of what needs to be done. And I think everybody would just have to make their own judgment call. Are you obligated to do for him? I don't think so. And, letting him be responsible for. And if he's dragging on you, then that's what I'm kind of relating it to, experiencing with this man. He's like, well, but you need to bring that to me. It's like, no. It was your responsibility to get out of the car. I don't need to, and I'm not going to. Just not come back down this way. I'll be glad to drop it off to you, but I'm not going to drive a 40-mile round trip to give you what you couldn't bother doing. So if there's frustration about, what he's capable of or willing to do, of course, that's a great gift for you, and he's going to have to be, I suspect, accountable unless you feel like it's within your purpose to reach out beyond your comfort zone and offer more support than you've been doing so far. And you've certainly been pretty generous with him.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues here. I can feel them bubbling up. About 4 worksheets already. Like, I don't want to be in the category of the people who throw him out, and that's how he would look upon it. He wouldn't understand that now we need our space back. He would say, oh, there's another person who really isn't very nice in the end, I don't want to be in that category. Well, maybe I'm going to have to be in that category. Big deal. I think if I could work through that.
Well, my offering would be, notice how words control, and this is one of the ways that people manipulate each other. Notice how words control your perception. If I say, gee, I've welcomed you into this space, and it's been here, and I told you at some point I'd need to reclaim it, I'm going to reclaim it. Now, he can put it in the category if it was somebody else that's throwing me out, but that would be a reality his mind would generate in his story, but you don't have to make that your story or your reality. I'm simply going to reclaim what we need to do. And if doing that, if you're kind of sucked into his reality, then great, there's your next piece of work. He's giving you the gift.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you look at that, you can look at, how many times in your life have you been manipulated into doing things that were not, or how many times in your life have you manipulated someone into doing things that really were out of integrity? And that would be some great worksheet stuff. How many, the worksheets that I would suspect this would take you into in terms of, in the light of Carl Jung's statement of bringing the darkness, make the darkness, bring it to awareness rather than imagining figures of light, would be how many times in your life have you been manipulated by others with realities that they, and or the reverse, have you ever done that with anyone? And each of those would be worksheets to take a look at and give you another chance to perhaps touch into some more of that unconscious dynamic, probably family system or cultural system dynamics that need to be worked through.
Yeah.
Maybe even a power person worksheet in there.
Yeah. I'm writing down. So, yep.
So often a power person tries to force their reality, especially on the child, in order to get what they want, in order to have their goals met, rather than honoring and respecting the goals that the child would have.
Yeah. A lot to think about.
I remember watching, it brings a situation to mind with a little one that I know, and the grandparents of this small child were together with the mom. We were there, and the grandparents wanted something from the child, which was something that seemed reasonable, and the mother stepped in and kind of harshly blocked them. It's like, well, you need to listen to what she wants, which was true. They did need to do that. But then in a later case, or a later situation when the child expressed something they wanted, the mother did the exact reverse. And while she looked like she was advocating for what the child wanted, what she was really doing was advocating for what she wanted. Because a short time later, when the child expressed a desire, the mom just squashed that desire and told the person involved, forget it, it's not going to happen. But it was clear that it was about mom's desires, not what it appeared to be at first of honoring the child's desires. So there are all kinds of little games that we can play with imposing our realities on others, trying to, put them into a state of hypnosis of accepting our perceptual constructs rather than being with their own.
Well, my brain is in a complete snarl.
Well, remember, that's one of the stages of healing. When I can bring up conflicting information and I keep pouring truth into my mind, then the underlying dynamics that create the confusion tend to heal. I just keep pouring truth in, exposing the unconscious parts, the darker parts, and, dealing with the so-called shadow.
Yeah.
The shadow doesn't let go easily.
No. I have huge goals for this guy. To look at his shit. I gotta let go of that goal and look at my own. Oh, excuse my language, but that's how it feels.
Right. I hear you. It may be appropriate to, be insistent on, it's time for you to take responsibility for yourself, that I've gone as far as I'm willing to go. And if that means you need to look at your shit, then you need to look at it. That can be a reasonable construct alongside of, and I need to look at mine too. But that other one can also be a reasonable one. One doesn't, displace the other.
Right. Oh, boy. Okay. Well, maybe I should get off because I need to do some work before I can be coherent.
Well, we'll hold the space and breathe with you, young lady. Notice the places where your body's tightening up, or maybe your throat wants to close, and softly, gently breathe into it, and just allow whatever needs to surface to surface. It's an awesome space to be in.
I don't like it right now. Not much. Yeah. No,
I hear you.
I had a nephew once who, the babysitter named Mrs. Davis, and she was an old, rather crabby lady. And he would know that it was time for Mrs. Davis to come over, and he would run to his mother and say, "No honor, Mrs. Davis, and come to my house." He was. That's the way I feel about this. I don't want to handle this. No want to. Yep. Anyway,
well,
thank
there's
you,
a
Michael.
game. There's a game that the non-being mind plays of I want to be comfortable, which means,
Oh, terribly.
I remember seeing a cartoon that expressed this very well. Here's a person who's in a cesspool, and they're up to their lower lip in the cesspool, and somebody else is getting into the cesspool, and the little bubble where they're communicating with the person getting into the cesspool says, "Don't make waves."
Right.
And sometimes people come into our lives to make waves, and it's time for us to cancel the need, the way we want it to be, and be with what is, and be with what that resonates in us, and process through it, breathe through it, and that's what leads to new and more powerful levels of clarity.
Yeah, I do love that Yeshua wasn't a softie. We often think of him as, at least I did, he was not a softie. And I think
he got in people's faces.
That. Yeah.
Yeah, when people weren't willing to be accountable, he got in their faces. When they were willing to be accountable, he was the space of active love that supported them, oftentimes fending off their attackers. But in other cases where people were in denial, there's that one case where your father, not meaning the worldly father, but the source of your thinking, is a liar, and there is no truth in it. I mean, you got really in their faces and real clear. It's like your perceptual constructs are totally and completely fake and false here, and you're trying to maintain them. And we need to get to the place where our Father, the source of our thinking, is love and connected to truth, rather than things that make things look and feel nicey nice.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
The world was to kick us in the limitation, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it does that.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you,
Life
Michael.
is so fraught with opportunities. All right, young lady, appreciate you holding the space, breathing with you.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Blessings.
Thanks.
Well, Miss Jeannie?
Awesome. Sorry, I about dropped my phone, disconnected myself.
Well, you're still here.
Nobody else has a hand up, and the chat room's been acting really weird. Dr. Tim said he had trouble at the beginning of the show, that he got kicked off a couple times and had trouble getting back in and got issues today. So I don't know if I had actually signed into the chat room and said, "Hello, Jeannie here," and now that message is gone. So it's just not working at all, I suppose. So if you are in a chat room on the internet or whatever, we can't see you. So if you have a question or comment, call in 563-999-3581. We have 16 minutes. And let's give an update on things that are going on. Tomorrow is the book club. Saturday is my Shifter Still Point Breathing. And seemed like we had something else in there this week.
I don't think we've got any other conferences or podcasts to do at this point.
Yeah.
But if no one has a question or a thought, I'd like to share a little bit about actually a project that Jeannie and I worked on yesterday and we're heading out to work on again today, just to invite people to consider, as you live a holy life, not H-O-L-Y, but live life W-H-O-L-L-Y, holy, and paying attention on every level. We've been talking a little bit about the learning we've been doing regarding the gardening we've been engaging in. And Jeannie has set up a page for homegrown national parks on our website. And we just put together a brief article entitled, "Is There Hope for Pollinators?" And I started that article out with a quote from Carl Sagan, who says, "Extinction is the rule, survival is the exception." And that, we really need to wake up to our part in what's going on in what we call the natural world. So I was looking up some statistics, and one of the things that they're telling us is that 80% of insect biomass has disappeared from planet Earth in the last 25 to 30 years. And somebody had done a calculation that if we weighed every insect on the planet, there are 17 times greater number of pounds of insects than there are humans on the Earth. And in 25 to 30 years, 80% of that has disappeared. 41% of global insect species have gone extinct over the last decade. And so the project that Jeannie and I are working on that we've talked about a little bit is creating, we're eradicating, we're starting out with an area that's just about 25 feet by 100 feet of lawn that is no longer lawn. It's actually got cardboard all over it right now, killing off the grass and getting ready to put some soil amendments in it and to plant some indigenous species and threatened species plants here to feed pollinators. And it's something that anybody can do. I mean, even if you're living in an apartment, you can do some indigenous species plants on your deck of your apartment and feed pollinators. And I hadn't realized that, when I think of pollinators, they talk a lot about, monarch butterflies, but actually monarch butterflies don't do much pollinating, although their species has decreased by thousands of percent in just the last few years. I think in California, I was reading that, something like 90% of monarch butterflies have disappeared. And one of the things that we've been learning as we've been studying gardening, and it's extended out into this arena, is that many pollinators, like among the 500 different kinds of bees there are in America, many pollinators can only rear their young in relationship to one plant, one native species of plant. And we start planting invasive species, and people go in and bulldoze the forest and get rid of the indigenous plants there. And interestingly enough, it's become a huge money business. You take the indigenous plants in America and call them weeds and sell them for big bucks in Europe, and you take the indigenous plants of Europe and you call them weeds over there and you sell them over here for big bucks. It's really become a huge commercial business to literally wipe out indigenous species. And there's a life-threatening, catastrophic collapse of nature in the winds if we don't take care of this insect population. Rarely do people like insects, but without them, we wouldn't have a food supply. And the rate of extinction of insects is just catastrophic. Recognize that all ecosystems, as food for other creatures, as pollinators, as health maintenance, as recyclers of nutrients, that's happening, they're telling us. Researchers are saying 8 times faster than mammals, birds, and reptiles, which are tragically disappearing. And they're saying that the insect trends are a confirmation that there's a 6th major extinction event happening on the Earth, which is going to impact us all, and there's something we can do about it. You know, we can change the way we produce food, the way we buy food. And if insects go down the path of extinction, we're in trouble within a very few decades. And so we're just putting this out as another call to live holistically and to consider the environment that you live in, what native insects feed what native birds, feed what native pollinators. And if you're looking out front, you've got a Japanese maple, and you've got a maple, and you've got a Chinese clover, and you've got this plant and that plant that comes from, they're exotic. Some purveyor of that plant told you how beautiful they were and how wonderful they were and sold them to you for big bucks. And how many people pulled the native species out of the ground that was needed for that pollinator to grow, to rear its young. And the number of things that threaten that we can do something about, as individuals, for life on Earth. And this whole thing is about, this whole body of work is about understanding from every perspective what needs to be done to enhance life on Earth, human life, and all other life. So when you look at the things that we participate in individually and collectively, pesticide use, agriculture, deforestation, the habitat loss, predation by these exotic animals and invasive plant and insect species, overexploitation by hunters, poachers, the pet trade. People buy pets and they don't think about where that came from and what was done to the environment in order to have that pet. The poisoning of pest animals in the wild. There are farmers, ranchers oftentimes will poison the carcass of one animal so that many other animals will come and eat off of it and die as well, which seems like, gee, that really is helpful, isn't it? But not when you start to recognize the impact on the environment of that kind of behavior. Yeah, it might help that rancher today in his ranch, but if it wipes out a local, bee population that only exists in that area, what has happened to the overall experience of life on the planet? So the unbridled development that happens, logging, fires, global warming, environmental pollution, light pollution, insects go to the light. Well, those lights weren't around 100 years ago. How many insects die because they are drawn to a light source that shouldn't even be there? We really need to be thinking about those things. And so our invitation is to take a look. Jeannie's got a page on the website. I'm sure she's probably already put the link into the notes if you want to take a look at it. But the solution is in everybody's hands. We can develop a conscious land ethic, which results in ecologically functional landscapes, restoring of native species habitat, and it's like that we start to do this. Sterilizing the soil by pouring glyphosate on it before you plant a cash crop, a mono cash crop that's destructive to native species is a pretty bizarre thing to do. And of course, if you go into the grocery store and buy those things, that's what keeps those things going. So we just invite everybody to do some research and take a look at that regard, and see what the way you live is doing to the ecosystem. Vote with your dollars. Where do you spend your money? And somebody had quoted, "Love them or loathe them," with humans, that humans cannot survive without insects, much as we may dislike them. And then another barometer of the plight of global biodiversity is that in North America, since 1970, there's been a reduction of about 2.9 billion birds, 29% of birds are gone from America. And there's an estimated drop of 49% in bird species worldwide. Those birds live on, exist on, reproduce on, raise their young on insects. If insects, and one of the things one researcher points out is many insects co-evolved with one plant and can only reproduce and bring about the next generation if that plant is available. And if humans have come along and torn it out of the ground and disappeared it, where does that insect go? And one of the examples that this fellow Ptolemy used was that there's a North Carolina chickadee that weighs, I think he said it was a 1/16 of an ounce. Takes 8,000 to 9,000 grubs to raise one clutch of this particular chickadee. And those grubs only grow on native species plants. And if the birds don't have those caterpillars, those creatures, then the birds are extinct. They're going to disappear. And that's happening at a really alarming rate. So one set of statistics I was just researching today for this article says that they're out of known bird species, they're just over 11,000. And of the 11,000 known species, 159 have become extinct. 226 are critically endangered, 461 are endangered, 800 are vulnerable, and 1,000 are nearly ready to be put on the threatened list. That's a lot of biodiversity threatened. And the easy solution is you can start a homegrown national park right on the deck of your apartment, or, we're starting with just, as I say, 100 by a 25 square foot area. And we're going to plant, Jeannie found a couple, especially, what was it, clover, sweetie, that are on the list for extinction. They're just about gone. So there are a couple of plants we're going to plan to plant here, and some research, of course, needs to be done in each area. There's a Department of Natural Resources that will be glad to assist you in your areas to what plants are needed in order to support the pollinators, the birds, and the whole ecosystem. So just something to think about as we look at every aspect of life and what our part is in bringing it about. This gentleman named Ptolemy has set up a site for registering your property as a homegrown national park and encourages people to register, and he'll work with them to help to develop these native species, eradicate invasive species. He specifically gets into what species need to be literally torn out of your yard. If they're there, they're destroying, and they need to be pulled out and replaced with something that's indigenous and will support the local insect population. Again, much as people tend not to like insects, can't live with them, can't live without them maybe. But the truth is, we've done so much destruction of them that we ourselves are going to be threatened by it. So another important little piece of the puzzle, whether it's forgiveness, whether it's working within the context of responsibility communication or healing through relationships, we're here to bring every aspect of what it takes to live a truly holy lifestyle and support all of life, and create a global economy that makes it feasible, sustainable for us to live as human beings. So glad that you're with us to share this time every day that you are. Once the show is complete, you can go to whyagain.org. There's a microphone in the center of the page. Click on it. You can drill down, and you can download this, a link to this show, or you can listen to it just right there on our website. And you can download the show and pass it on to someone else. So invite someone else to be part of this conversation. In the meantime, create the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the world. Blessings. Bye-bye.